Good evening. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to News in Focus. My name is Faraz Patel. We'd like to say Jazakallah to you, the viewer, for staying with us here on Hilaal TV, DSTV channel 347. Of course, South Africa marked a milestone. We're not talking about sports, we're talking about load shedding. Over 200 days has been recorded of constant electricity supply, which dates back to the 26th of March. And of course, Eskom held a briefing earlier this week to discuss the achievements that have occurred with regard to that. Now, the uninterrupted supply is the result of an operational recovery plan which has reduced unplanned outages by about 8.6%. Energy availability also improved by 7.7%. Now, joining us via Zoom, I'd like to welcome Eric Shunmagum, who is the Eskom General Manager in the Office for Group Executive for Generation. Eric, good day. Thank you so much for joining us here on News in Focus on Hilaal TV.
Raz, good afternoon, and thanks for giving me this opportunity on Hilaal TV, and good afternoon to your listeners as well.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. Eric, we heard the Minister saying that we are on the path of a 70% energy availability factor by next year. How important is this given the many years that South Africa has been plunged into darkness?
Raz, I think this has come through a very long journey, but it has been a planned journey. Clearly put in project plans to recover. And I think as communicated previously through other various media platforms, the Generation Recovery Plan was approved in March last year. And critical to this recovery plan were three broad elements that we had to focus on to get the desired outcome as we see today. And it's been on people focus, plant focus, and specifically processes. So I think it actually worked out extremely well after the formation of the Energy Action Plan under the leadership of the presidency, the appointment of the new board in October. The new board met with the Eskom leadership, and there was a focused discussion with the generation leadership. We then agreed on a recovery plan that was then approved and actually communicated in March last year. But I think important to this recovery plan was any plan, if not enabled, you will not actually achieve the desired outcomes. So the first one was to say, behind this plan, we will require resources. We'll require money to fund this plan. We'll also require that some of these processes that actually take so long, we'll actually would want some of these lethargic procurement processes to actually shorten. And then behind the funding, we could then start to do long-term planning, because in the generation space, you plan for up to 24 months. So that, I think, was the first element. The other element was to say, in terms of plant, we identified 6 high-priority plant that contributed 70% towards the breakdowns. And that gave birth to us putting together a plan that will say we would recover 6,000 megawatts over the duration of the 2.5 years, and leading to 65% this year, and next year we move into 70%. And in those fixed plant, there were specific tangible pieces of plant at each of these power stations. As much as we identified the 6 priority stations, but this was to all power stations, we put together a recovery office, and that was the second element. The third element was around people, and we really do underestimate the value of people. And I think the appointment of the board, the support of EXCO, the appointment of the new group executive around last year, around April, then gave rise to us actually focusing on leadership stability, because we really underestimate that. And what then the new leader, Bheki Khumalo, put in place was to say, I need the right people in the right place. And through that, we actually placed very experienced power station managers at these critical plants, and behind capacity, filling in the vacancies, we talked about getting the right competence, and the last element is about the culture. You know, for me, culture is such an important element when you start to look at people. So I think looking at those three broad elements, we were able to put together this plan, focus on the plan. The board also then formed an operations, a BOPC, which is a subcommittee of the board, and they had actually very focused discussions on the recovery. So we religiously reported on the recovery month on month, and that gave now rise to us, experiencing today's 204 days. We sit with 63% EAF, and as we aspire to 70% for us, I think what's important is as we start aspiring towards 70%, we then give now opportunity for us to do maintenance because we've got the required reserve margin, right? And you know what we've said is good planned maintenance. It's about not doing maintenance, but it was about doing quality maintenance, effective maintenance, and that's what's given rise over the recent months. I must also add that in this process, a lot of the substandard contractors were actually removed. We had specific stations where we terminated those contracts, and we went back to actually securing our contracts with the recognized things.
So, Mr. Shunmagum, and I want to touch on that. You know, you talked about the plants, you talk about these power stations, some of them that were not effectively working, that now have been turned around. How important was that? Because sustainability is something that is only achieved if there is the right people at these power stations.
So I think what we've noticed, and we've done an organizational survey for us, is that in the last survey, there's a sudden upbeat with people. The morale levels are high. People feel wanted. They feel required. And as a result, more effort is given into actually giving sustainability to this plan. So once again, I think it's behind leadership. If you take, 2 years ago, we had also had high dependence on Medupi and Kusile delivering for us. And against the backdrop, we identified these stations were built with defects. There were 6 big defects that were built into this new build program. We actually subsequently focused through the contractor. We were able to fix those defects. We're now at the tail end of fixing these defects at Kusile. But if you really look at the performance that we got at Medupi, that we're getting at Medupi, and that we're getting now at Kusile, we're starting to see the benefits of no load shedding. And we know what load shedding does. I mean, no load shedding means better financials on our books because we use lesser diesel, but also it contributes to stimulating the economy. The aspiration is to actually, Eskom should contribute to at least 2% of growth with this renewed focus of no load shedding.
Eric, I've just got 2 questions and I need 2-minute answers from you, if you can, please, on this. I mean, the generational operational recovery plan, and you would have known, and because you right in there with regards to the discussions of this, how important was it to implement this during these difficult times, especially when you look at, 2022, even last year, when load shedding was at its peak? Talk to us about that, please.
So for us, one of the conscious decisions that we had to make last year was, and this is where the acting CEO, who's now the CFO, Caleb Kassim, we went to our principals and we said, we have to invest in quality maintenance. And investing in quality maintenance would mean you're taking away from availability. It would mean we're going to end up having higher stages of load shedding. And as a result, we actually would require more diesel to compensate, because as a levelized cost, diesel costs much cheaper to load shedding the country. So if you take our experiences, when you look at even this year in January, when we actually went into stage 6, we were doing close to 14% of planned maintenance, and we had to do that maintenance. Remember, there are also some other things that had happened last year. We had, in the previous year in October, we had the problem at Kusile where the stack had actually contributed And as a result, we had to bypass the permanent stack and we had to build in the temporary stacks. And already in December, as we started to tie in the three temporary stacks, we started to see already, 2,400 megawatts onto the system. That's like two stages of load shedding. But just to give you once again context, last year in May, we were hovering around close to 18,000 megawatts. There were days where 19,000 megawatts of breakdowns. As I speak to you today, we are trending between 10 and 11,000 breakdowns. That already is a recovery of that 6,500, which is about, we talked about just over 7% recovery on EAF. Last year, this time, we were sitting at 55%. As I speak to you now, we're sitting at 63%. So everything is looking very positive. And once again, we had to make a conscious effort to do the planned maintenance to actually ensure, I can equate that to your car. You take in your car for a 20,000 service, you expect the OEM to actually deliver. And as a customer, you'd want to only go back to your service in the next 20,000. And that's what you want. So for our power stations, that's what we are pushing for as a philosophy.
After the break, I continue my conversation with Eric Shunmagum. We're going to be touching on the role of the NTCSA, the future of renewables, and the big question, is South Africa out of the woods in terms of load shedding? I'll have more for you after this break. Welcome back to News in Focus. I'm still in conversation with Eric Shunmagum, who is the Eskom General Manager in the Office for Group Executive for Generation. Eric, again, thank you so much for staying with us. Dr. Hosensura Mukhopa had mentioned that there's still work that needs to be done on Medupi and Kusile. And I think, you've mentioned it earlier on, the importance of these power stations. What is the timeline from a generation perspective that Eskom's looking at for these power stations to say, well, they're 100% working and we can have full reliance on them in terms of delivering the megawatts that are needed?
So for us, let me just take you through Medupi and then we'll go through to Kusile. I think at Medupi, the focus is on getting Medupi 4. You're aware that we had this explosion a few years ago on Medupi 4. And we had two options. One was to replace it with a new stator. And the second option was to say, as a quicker option, we would actually consider using a second-hand stator, which we got. It's on site. There are active plans to actually reintegrate this into the system. As we've communicated in the system outlook, the plan is to have this back integrated into the system by March 2025. I must highlight that, when you buy in a unit that you try to, fit in with an existing configuration, it does come with some challenges. So there are some inherent risks, but we are managing it. There's a dedicated project team. So that would be potentially 700 megawatts coming to the system, 800 being generated. Then the next issue is that we have to integrate the permanent solution at Kusile for those 3 units that we had on the temporary stacks. Those project plans are in place, and they are basically, I think, all in. There's no deviation. We've got good feedback, so that should happen between November and March. We should have those the permanent stack integrated. But once again, it's in the plans, so there's no additional as such risks to that. And then we've got Medupi 6. That's the last unit at Medupi that will be synchronized into the system. Once Medupi 6 is synchronized into the system, it will then take a further 6 months for them to do all the functional tests, the performance tests and optimization tests. And then 6 months later, we should see Medupi 6 coming into the grid. And then lastly, you're aware that we're busy with the Kuberg, the second generator refurbishment. Those plans, once again, it's coming with some inherent risks. We've learned from the first generator, and there we're expecting that unit to come back into the system by the end of December, early January. So, your question is, where do we stand? I think having this additional 2,500 megawatts integrated back into the system, I think will actually bode well for us. And I'm sure next year, this time, we'll be having a very different conversation around load shedding. So those are the plans, as discussed by the minister, and this is how we are managing it for us.
Eric, the National Transmission Company of South Africa, of course, was launched a few weeks ago, and the big discussion there is that how much will it contribute in terms of future of energy security? How much will it contribute in terms of that, given that the target of 70% next year on the EAF is something that Eskom, along with the Energy and Electricity Department, are looking at?
So transmission is going to play a critical role. Raz, if you look at their plans, I mean, they will go out again very soon communicating the transmission development plan, the TDP. And when you really look at the construction, you're looking at over 14,000 kilometers of line that needs to be constructed. But what's also important is to connect close to 30 gigawatts of new capacity. And I think with the NTSA, now being legally separated from the other divisions, they will have to work towards independence, having an independent transmission system operator, ensuring that through the market operator there's competition. And I think with line construction there are challenges, but in terms of the launch on the 7th, both the chairman as well as the acting CEO, I think gave us assurance that there's some accelerated plans to ensure that, in terms of project planning, project development, project execution, the construction of these new lines, the new transmission infrastructure, substations, huge, transformers will be put in place, and they've given some assurance that they will need to connect close to 30 gigawatts by 2029. So I think that's critically important, considering what's going to unfold in terms of the future bid windows and in terms of the new renewable capacity coming in. But also, when you look at generation, you're also aware that in terms of the emissions standards and the outcomes from the DFFE panel, there's pressure on Eskom to comply to the new limits. And as a result, there's pressure for us to shut down 5 stations by 2030. So it's going to be critical that we work closely to ensure that this new capacity is tied into the grid, but also generation also has plans in terms of repowering and repurposing to connect new capacity so that we can sustain the generation business.
You spoke about it now, Eric, in terms of, bid windows, and the bid windows are obviously going to involve, contributions from those who want to bring in renewable energies. And I think a big part of what the Government of National Unity or the 7th Administration has spoken about is the introductions of renewables and its future for energy security. Talk to us about that, because that drive is going to continue as we move away, as the world moves away from fossil fuels.
Yeah. So for us, I think the one important thing is, the IRP 2019, as promised, was not delivered in terms of the new capacity. And the pressure then fell back on generation and coal, right? And so when one looks at this whole picture, there's so many conflicting objectives, but I think it's important that we put focus to create balance. And the energy trilemma in terms of ensuring there's energy security, very critical. Then you talk about, sustainability and affordability. We also have a country that, we have to be very critical about jobs. But having said that, we've got some international commitments in terms of the Paris Agreement, and we are very aware of what we must do as a country. So there are plans. These plans, we are working also closely with our colleagues in the Energy Department of Energy. So once the IRP is, I think, promulgated, in early next year, we'll get a good feel of what's in the mix. But I think the accountability in terms of the transmission business to ensure that they openly and transparently and fairly connect the IPPs, the public, as well as private participants in the generation sector, has to be played out.
Eric, every South African wants to know this answer. Of course, we see various municipalities going through load reduction. Of course, This is down to the municipalities and, of course, how they are managing their various substations. And complaints are coming there. And, of course, it's not a one-size-fit-all scenario as we can look at it from that perspective. Is South Africa out of the woods in terms of load shedding? What more work needs to be done to say, yes, even if we get to the 70% EAF, there is a road towards a free load shedding South Africa?
Yeah. So I think just in terms of the business, the NTSA normally provides a document that's published annually at the end of October. So the MTSA, which is the adequacy, that looks at the adequacy over 5 years, I think that'll give us a good indication. Just in terms of where I sit, I think the bottom line is for us, as I've said, at the moment, we are definitely seeing a positive impact of renewables during the course of the day. I think the challenge is at midnight when you need 19,000 megawatts. Yes, you get some wind resources, but it's not consistent. There's no sun resources. So I think even in terms of the future bid windows, having the renewables come in with, sort of some kind of storage, battery or coming with gas would be critical. I could say with confidence, we're sitting at 204 days. When we presented the summer outlook, we were very, very buoyant in terms of the three scenarios. As long as we stick onto scenario one, which is trying to maintain breakdowns below 14,000, the system bodes well for the next 6 months. And I think with this next 6 months, us getting some of the new capacity coming in, some of the new independent capacity coming in, I think we should be looking forward to positive times. But I can't sit here and pronounce the date. I think it would be unfair. There are so many assumptions. These assumptions must realize. But from a generation point of view, I think our goal is to ensure that from a recovery plan, we recover those 6,000 megawatts. We've done very well in year one, and in the last 18 months, we've recovered close to basically 6,000 megawatts. We've got another 2,500 to recover in the coming year. And I think having that together with the new capacity coming in, I think we should be sitting in a good position there for us.
Eric, thank you so much for joining us here on News in Focus on Hilaal TV. Much appreciated.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity, and all the best to you and the team.
Thank you so much. That is Eric Shunmagum, who is the General Manager at Eskom in the Office of Group Executive for Generations. 204 days of load shedding. That's good news. There are certain municipalities, of course, having load reduction. The challenges still remain in terms of that, but from an entirety of the country, it's good news. Can it remain consistent? Well, if you listen to Dr. Hossein Ramokgopa, he says 70% by next year. Is it going to increase? A load-shedding free country equals higher GDP, more employment, a strong rand to the dollar, and a country that's growing. As South Africans, that's all we want. So that's all I have for you here on News in Focus. From myself, Faraz Patel, and the rest of the team in Johannesburg. I'll see you again, same time, same place. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.